start. All right. Okay. So let me share my slides here. So today, the program for today will be to focus, to shift gear and talk about organizational development. That will be our focus. And we'll have this case study. Hopefully you have all read it, the oil and Wasser case. And we'll have a chance to discuss that. Then we will debrief your process. And then some of you were asking, what about this leading and coaching diverse team activity? Today is the day where you will be working on it. As I said already to some of you, the reason I mentioned this earlier was to plant some seeds, to give you at least an opportunity to reflect on the subject, possibly read the chapter on this topic. But today will be the time when you will be actually working on this. So developing global organization is our topic now. And again, we are looking throughout this program together at different levels of applications for coaching across cultures. Last time, our focus was on one-on-one coaching. Today, we'll be focusing both on team coaching and organization development. But there is also a societal goal here. By promoting unity in diversity, we are doing, I think, something helpful when we see the world today, a lot of polarization in the world. If we can bring a bit more unity in diversity, we are doing something beneficial and needed. So organizational development. Maybe I will just move this so it will be easier to see for Takia. All right. First of all, when organizations develop, they have different ways to do that. Our role as an intercultural coach would be to possibly challenge the CEO or the person in charge. Is it always better, or is it necessarily better for an organization to grow? Sometimes there is this idea that we always need to be bigger, more volume, more market share, etc., scaling. Bigger is not necessarily better. And so that could be the first contribution we could have, would be to why do you want to grow in the first place? But maybe there are some good strategic reasons for a company to want to grow. And in this case, there are several options available. One would be through organic growth. You hire people, and so that's how your organization grows. A second option is with alliances. You ally with other companies, and so your outreach becomes greater. And then we have the possibility of merger and acquisitions. Our role as an intercultural coach could be to help those in charge of those decisions to decide what is maybe the best option for us. There are strategic reasons to for example, to consider a merger versus an alliance. I think as coaches, it would be interesting for us to be aware of some of those strategic reasons, because what happens, it turns out that leaders don't always decide based on strategy. They decide based on cultural preferences. For example, if my culture is about collaboration, maybe I will be more prone to engage in alliances when a merger may make better strategic sense. And vice versa. If my culture is about competition, maybe my tendency as a leader will be to acquire companies when maybe it's too risky to do that and not necessarily the best strategic choice. I'm not going to go into the details of this, but I refer to some research in the book Global Coaching on this topic. Again, sometimes I hear people say, coaches, we don't need to know much about the content. We are just master of the process. I would argue that to be able to be helpful, we need to do something about the context, about strategy, so we can ask good provoking questions to our coaches and help them discern whether their choice is based on a strategic imperative or more of a a pet strategy or a cultural inclination that may or may not be appropriate. A second area where we may help, let's say those in charge have decided to engage on a merger with another company, but they have not, the deal has not been made yet. So there is the process of due diligence to determine, for example, is this indeed a good fit? What would be conditions to make this a success? Companies have become very savvy at doing financial due diligence, but still, cultural due diligence, it's still an issue for many companies. They're not so good at that. And this could be a potential contribution for us to help in the due diligence process. Then there is the deal, and we can help behind the scenes ensure the deal is a win-win deal, is a good deal for the decision makers. Realistically, though, where we are most likely to intervene is in the integration. The decision has been made, the deal is done, but now the two companies coming together realize that it's going to be a little bit more complicated than what they had imagined. We can contribute to help this integration process and to ensure this is successful. All right, so first of all, if we just look at merger, acquisitions, and so on, we are talking about a huge volume of transactions. We are talking about in the trillions of dollars. So this is really gigantic. I don't know what the figures will be for the next years. I mean, nobody can really foresee that exactly. But what we can say with a high degree of certainty is that this will continue to be important. So maybe one year it will be up, 1 year it will be down, but this will continue to be an extremely important business activity, engaging in mergers and acquisitions. And guess what? The failure rate is just gigantic. When I wrote the book already several years ago, Global Coaching, the figures were around 50% of failures for alliances and more so even for merger acquisitions. I've seen more recent figures. It doesn't seem to be any better. I mean, I've seen figures up to 90% of failures. So you have companies coming together with high hopes, and they hope that more value will be created for clients, for the shareholders, and so on. And at the end of the day, what you get is a destruction of value. So for those who don't care about people, and who just care about the financial aspect, that should be enough to get their attention. I'm not talking about the human suffering, the waste of human potential, but just on a financial basis, this is really a waste. So why is that so? Why is that so? Many reasons. And, sometimes there is insufficient due diligence. Sometimes there wasn't a good strategic plan. Sometimes they've just paid too much. We're very optimistic, expecting too many synergies. So a lot of different reasons. But of course, the reason I mentioned this today is culture. It's not cultural differences per se are not the problem. The problem is that the cultural perspective is not sufficiently taken into account. So cultural differences are not a problem, but the inability or the unwillingness to acknowledge those differences, to take those into account, that is the problem. And this remains a problem. So culture as a threat, yes, it is, according to several research, indeed, the number one failure factor. I mean, we could argue that there are other reasons, but for sure, an important factor. Here's one example where this item, the cultural differences, was cited by 83% of the executives in the survey. That came up as the number one reason for failures. More recent research, this is more recent, last year. Again, this is a report by Bain & Company on global merger and acquisitions. You see it in cultural integration is hard. I would say it's still hard. Nearly 50% of our respondents listed cultural fit or difficulty integrating management teams as a primary reason why their past deals had failed. You could think after all these years that no companies master this, but this is not the case. So the surprising factor is not that culture is a problem. The surprising factor is that this is still a problem, that companies still have not come to terms with this reality. I mean, I say in general, of course, there are some companies that do a good job at this, that know how to integrate new companies, that do a very good job in when they engage in merger and acquisitions. But still, too many haven't found a way or have not paid sufficient attention to this. So what is the remedy? What can we do about this? One of the themes I've seen in different research findings again and again, and this is just one example in this Harvard Business Review article. Again, it's not cultural differences per se. You remember this other slide I showed you. It's being unprepared to deal with them. In the preparation phase of a deal, it's important to assess firms' respective cultures and to design the M&A process to bridge any gaps. So this idea of to deal with that, having a way to understand what are the different cultures at play and how can we bridge those gaps. That gaps that have been identified because you have assessed the different cultures. So that's clearly the remedy, and I've seen this in many articles, research findings. Another example of this, the same idea, is conducting a diagnostic of what are the two companies' cultures, what is the nature of the differences, and then finding a way to bridge those gaps. And you want to do this as early as possible, because if you wait too long until you have a mess, you have a larger problem to solve and you have less credibility with which to solve it. So again, a case of you want to be proactive rather than reactive. So what is the connection here with intercultural coaching and the COF? I think you guessed where I'm going with this. Huh? The COF, guess what? Well, it is a tool that can help to describe cultures at play. In fact, when you set up the assessment, and I would show you exactly how to do that in our next session, so you'll see the mechanics of this. It's very easy to set up. You can set up a project where you decide, hey, this will be company A, company B, and those who respond to the questionnaire, they need to say, well, I'm part of company A or I'm part of company B. And so you have the over aggregate results, but you also have the aggregate results per company. So this allows them to generate a creative dialogue around the key issues of cultural differences, similarities, synergies. And the energy, once we have identified the gaps, is on finding ways to bridge those gaps. Bridging the gap, not just adapting to the differences, but as much as possible in leveraging the differences, making the most of the differences. So this is going to be helpful in the integration phase, but ideally you would want to do this already earlier in the process, in the due diligence phase. All right, so let me share a couple of examples now of how I've been able to use this. One example where my role was rather modest, I have to say, and we didn't even use the COF assessment, which didn't exist at the time, actually. That's the case of Unilever acquiring Best Food. That was in 2001. This is an example of a real success. In fact, the person in charge of that acquisition became the next CEO. They had a different name for it. I think it was chairman, but it was very successful. But what Unilever did was different from what I've just described. They really made an effort to understand the differences and to make the most of these differences. The consulting company in charge of that project was the Hay Group, and I don't I don't think they used any tool, but they just did some interviews. And based on these interviews, they came up with a description of the differences. So you have, for example, one difference to just, you have a list here, but one of the difference was around decision making. For best food, there was a culture of being quick to decide and to act. Whereas for Unilever, there was something described as analysis paralysis. They would spend a great deal of time analyzing the problem, trying to understand this before taking any action. So I had a chance to work with top executives from both entities. And I remember one executive from Unilever was a bit frustrated because things were taking a long time to get into action would take a long time. So I asked him, how would your colleague from Best Food handle this situation? And he said, well, he would dispense with all this planning and analyzing. He would just try something and see what happens. And I asked him, what prevents you from doing that? He said, well, nothing really. I mean, I could indeed try something. And it turns out, yeah, it often worked. And so that was a case of learning from their colleague a different way different from what they had been used to. But I had also a situation with somebody from Best Food who was quick to act, but he had the difficulties bringing people to engage in whatever action he wanted to have. And I asked him, well, how would your colleague from Unilever handle this situation? He said, well, they would have a plan, and then they would talk to the different stakeholders, ensuring they have all the stakeholders on board. Well, what prevents you from doing that, from trying that? Nothing really. And so what happened was they understood that they can learn something from this other culture, that there could actually be a mutual enrichment. Respect came automatically. It was not a case of saying you should respect your colleague from this other company. No, respect was automatic in the sense that they realized that they can learn from each other. And so that became part of the new culture of, rather than trying to impose one culture onto the other company, there was in fact an intention of creating a new culture that would be the synthesis of both these cultures, a new culture that would be aligned with the vision they had for this joint company. And so I don't think it was by chance that this merger became a success. Maybe there were other factors, but certainly I could see working with these leaders how they came to respect each other. And rather than having some of the best people from Best Food leaving the company because they would have been alienated by the new owner, they stayed there. They felt, they were respected and they could contribute. So that's one story. But now let me get into another project where I worked with some of you. I mean, your former colleagues, people who also had been certified to and learn to use the COF. Group of 3 people. The mandate initially was to not to come in as a coach, but as a consulting company. And the mandate was, please, can you help us do a cultural audit of these 2 companies? I'm not allowed to mention the name of these 2 companies. It took 5-6 years before I obtained that permission, by the way. And I think that was smart for them to do that. They realized that to be successful, we want to pass the test of time. It's not enough to just be successful after 1 year. We want to make sure that several years go by that we can really say this was a success. Anyway, the mandate doing a cultural audit. So the process we had was to do a combination of interviews with representative samples of both companies, not the entire company, but those who were in a position to cooperate with one another. Schiphol Airport and Aéroport de Paris, the airport in Paris. And we did that. a first round of interviews which allowed us to identify additional cultural dimensions that could be interesting to add to the standard 17 dimensions in the COF. So we added those dimensions, we ran the COF assessment, and we conducted more interviews. And so what I'm about to share here are some of the conclusions, some of the findings, as well as some of the actions that were taken as a result of this initial audit. Because indeed, after the audit, then we were hired as coaches, as team coaches. So, by the way, first of all, that was the way the client wanted us to present this material. What is interesting to notice is that there were more cultural similarities than differences between the two companies. I think you can guess where. Do you think these two companies were more on scarce time or plentiful time? They were very similar. Do you think it would be more scarce or more plentiful, do you think?
More scarce?
Yes, I mean, indeed, if you look at most companies today, rarely do you see a company where people will tell you, well, we have plenty of time, we can just relax. It just doesn't happen like that. So scarce time and so on, a number of similarities, some small differences, and then some more important differences. In this case, the differences were the ones you could have expected due to national differences. The Dutch have a reputation, Frédéric, you will tell me if this is correct, for being direct, rather direct, more so than the French, and also more equalitarian than the French. We'll see that the results are not black and white, but so that those were differences and the similarities. Good news, bad news. The good news when you have differences is you can leverage those differences. That can create some misunderstanding and some frustration, which indeed took place there, but there is an opportunity to learn from those differences. With similarities, the good news is that, yes, there is less chance for misunderstanding. They share the same culture, but the risk is having a blind spot, a common blind spot. If everybody sees the time as scarce, they all miss the possibility that time could be more plentiful. So the risk of overusing, in this case, scarce time, overlooking plentiful time. So let me share, that's exactly how we presented that material. Again, the client in the end, at the beginning, was much into control. They wanted to present that material in a certain way. After a while, they released that control and were much more easygoing. But you can see here on both sides the preference for scarce time. The thing is, once you show results like that, this is not rocket science. This is not quantum physics. I mean, it becomes almost a no-brainer to decide what you will do about this. Once the top team saw this, I also shared some anecdotes with them from the interviews. And the anecdotes from the interviews was people were a bit frustrated that they would meet their colleagues, and because they didn't have much time, they would just talk business. And some people said, I wish I could get to know my colleagues, from the Netherlands or from France a bit more. And so the recommendation is just, why don't you just take the time to get to know each other? When did you just have an event where you just celebrate this alliance and you have a good time together? And to the credit of these two CEOs, the French and the Dutch, they decided very quickly to organize a 2-day event, kind of a festive event. It was not much about work, but just about building relationship. They had a great time together during those 2 days. They took the time to just have a good time together. And guess what? The time they invested there was recuperated later because the collaboration was much easier afterwards. They had started to build relationships. So not only did they have a good time, but their work was more efficient later on as well. So, but because they were on scarce time and they had not stepped back, they hadn't considered this possibility. So universalist, particularist. Universalist, it's, if you remember, overall coherence is what matters, and particularist is you want flexibility. you see, again, it's not black and white, but they were both more on the side of particularism. They would insist to continue to work in their own way. And in fact, they never came up with a common brand. A traveler going through Paris or through Amsterdam would know that there was even an alliance there, because they continue to keep their identities, each their own identity, and they wanted to maintain that flexibility. But then my question to them was, what is the point of having an alliance? I mean, if you continue to work separately in your own way, why do you have an alliance in the first place? And they recognize that maybe we need to put more in common. Maybe there are economies of scales to be gained. And indeed, they started to for example, in the area of purchasing, to come together and be able to negotiate better deals. They started to share more of the technologies, to try as much as possible to have some common technologies. That's something you see also among car manufacturers sometimes, where the chassis would be the same, the exterior is different, but then what is underneath that you don't see may be the same. And that's so they were started to think more in that way. But then differences, hierarchy, equality. You see, it's not black and white, because if you look at the chart here, yes, clearly the Dutch clearly more on the side of equality, but even the French, it's not that the French are all for hierarchy. In fact, you could even say the French, on average, were also more on the side of equality. But relatively speaking, clearly the Dutch were more on the side of equality than the French. So I have a little cartoon to illustrate what would happen there. What would happen is they would have mixed project teams, typically with responsible for a particular project, always with two leaders, one from Schiphol Airport, Dutch, and one French. When they would work together, the Dutch had been empowered to decide without having to ask their hierarchy, can we do this or not? No, they had been empowered and they had the authority to decide on a lot of things. Not so with the French. So what would happen is they would discuss something, the Dutch were ready to move forward, but the French leader would have to ask his manager. I say his because oftentimes it was his, not her. It was there were more men, let me put it this way, in the managerial ranks than women. That's also a phenomenon. And that manager would have to ask his manager, and ultimately it would end at the top executive committee.
Can I ask a question, Philippe?
Yes.
It seems that the Dutch are much more able to take a risk and also to afford a possible mistake.
Well,
more than the French. Is that a correct reading of this situation?
Well, I mean, to some extent, you could say that in the sense that when you empower somebody, if I'm an executive and I empower somebody, I'm taking a chance that the person may not do what is appropriate. Of course, if you delegate correctly, you would only delegate after trust has been built. You will put the right boundaries. So this is not about having crazy risk. You want to make sure that the process and the trust is there, so that you can fully trust that these leaders are not going to be reckless and that they will make sound decisions. But for sure, there is a risk that the decision that leader will make will not necessarily be the decision you would have made. So that's for sure, yes. So in any event,
Can I ask
Yes.
a question? Sorry.
Yeah, no, of course.
In this
Feel free to
case,
interrupt me, of course.
in this case or in other cases, what was the purpose of an alliance? What was the ultimate purpose of doing this together?
Well, that's a good question, but there were some strategic reasons for this. There were some strategic reasons to have an alliance, and I don't remember exactly what those reasons were. In fact, those airports, these two airports, they had also branches in other parts of the world. It was not just these two airports, but there were some strategic reasons which I don't remember, to be honest with you. But there was also a cultural reason, interestingly enough. The French CEO confided in me and he said, besides the strategic reason, my intention in having this alliance is I want my executives to change some of their behaviors. And I think that by having them collaborate with people from the Netherlands, they will be exposed to other practices, and that will hasten some of the cultural changes I would like to see in my own company. So that was a second reason, actually, that he mentioned to me. And then he actually mentioned that to the people as well. So these two reasons, strategy and cultural change. And then, so going back to this, because that's not the end of the story. I hope I've answered those questions, but that's not the end of the story here. One day, one of the French middle manager was on the plane with the top French guy, the CEO. And he mustered the courage to go and speak to that CEO. And he said, I have this idea, this project. Can I share this with you? And the CEO, who was a nice guy, said, of course, yes. And after that discussion, the CEO said, that's a great idea. Yeah, we should do this. And then the middle manager said to the CEO, but your board has rejected this idea 15 days ago. This came as a shock to the French CEO. And this is now the moment of truth. To the credit of this French CEO, he decided to make some changes. He decided, I'm going to give more authority to these middle managers. They will be authorized to make a number of decisions without referring to their hierarchy. So I'm going to empower them more. But also, when we are talking about really huge projects, even if they are not going to have the authority to decide on their own, they will be able to come to the executive committee and defend their case directly, without going through the chain of command. So essentially, he took some action which conveyed the sense that he was serious about cultural change there. But now, fast forward, we have team coaching between, we would have the French and the Dutch working together. And we would still have sometimes a middle manager saying, well, I'm sorry, I cannot decide. I will need to ask my manager. Then we would take this person one-to-one. We didn't want to embarrass that manager in front of everybody. And we'd say to the manager, well, you could have said that maybe a few weeks or a few months ago, but now you have been empowered, so it is up to you to seize the moment. The cultural change is going through you right now. How can you step up to this challenge here and now? So we would really work with these individual leaders so that they also would take their responsibility, because it was easier for them before. We have an expression in French, I don't know if you said in English, opening the umbrella. That means, you don't need to decide. You don't need to take any responsibility. That's for your boss. In some respect, it is frustrating, but in other respect, it's more comfortable as well. I'm not responsible. It's the other guy who will decide. No, well, guess what? No, you have to decide. You have been empowered, so it's going to be your responsibility. And I guess what I'm saying here is cultural change. At some point, everyone will be called to do something. And we need to see that everyone is able to step up and raise to the challenge. And that's what happened here. We had situations with these mixed project teams with two leaders no longer talking with each other. And they realized, in fact, they had the same objective, but there was just a cultural misunderstanding that could be resolved. But going back to the previous slide, we didn't want to give the Dutch the impression that, hey, you are so smart, you're going to teach the French how to lead. And you don't need to learn anything because your management is already, or your leadership is already so superior. Well, they too had to learn or could learn from the French. Because the problem with some of these Dutch executives is when they wanted to do something, they would just say it during a meeting, and they didn't realize, because they lacked the political sensitivity, that sometimes if you say something and you have not spent time approaching the different stakeholders one-on-one, testing the waters with them, ensuring you get their support, well, the idea will be killed in that meeting by these people, because they should have asked me that first. I should have discussed this with me first. So they will never say it. That they will never admit that, or I don't think that it's a personal issue. But in practice, they may be resistant to an idea because they have not been brought on board and they felt they should have been. So that sensitivity, they learn more from the French. That if you want to make sure your idea will be taken into account, may want to spend time doing what I would call constructive politics. More on this next time. Actually, Elio will be presenting on this, I believe, if I remember correctly, as volunteer to talk about constructive politics next time. Anyway, I hope it's still okay. So,
Philippe,
yes.
I have another question. Sorry. I'm having a hard time understanding where it goes from the decision made to establish, once the alliance established and you came into the equation, how were those agreements to merge those cultures? How were they translated? In what way? Was it in values, in policies? So that French guy, knew that, okay,
it was the way it was is what I'm trying to describe here. They use the COF as a vocabulary to understand their differences and to find ways to make the most of these differences. They recognize that here we have a difference. Some prefer equality, other people prefer hierarchy. We don't need to choose whether it's going to be equality or hierarchy. How can we make the best of both worlds? So that was really the idea. Does that make sense?
But it stays in a conversation, or is that translated into policies and?
Okay. Well, I'm gonna get to that.
Okay, sorry.
No. But that's a very important question. I'm gonna get to that, and we'll show you how it was done by the mixed project team, but also by the top team, how they implemented that. But part of this team coaching was first about raising awareness, and getting them to reflect on how they could leverage the differences. How it was implemented, I will get to that in a moment.
Philippe, a small question as well. The constructive politics to the COF, it has to do with hierarchy equality, or where should I see it? Yes.
Yes, it has to do with hierarchy in particular.
Okay.
Now, I'm not going to say more. No, I will let Elio present that.
Okay.
Just not to put pressure, but
okay.
Next time. Yes.
Okay.
When you don't have, to make just a quick thing, when you don't have the power yourself, because you have not been empowered, how do you get things done? Well, you need to build alliances, you need to do something if you want to have some influence. And you can do this negatively, in a destructive fashions, or you can do this more constructively. And that's what I would call constructive politics. That's just a very quick answer. I was surprised to also see the people from the Netherlands there. I don't mean to stereotype, but that's exactly what happened. They were not impressed by the big boss. They had a lot of respect, but they would treat him essentially as an equal. But what was a surprise for me is to see even senior executives in France, in front of the big boss, they were not so comfortable. He's the big boss, even though the guy was quite a nice guy, but there was this sense of hierarchy much more than at Schiphol Airport.
And I think as well the French, in French you have, in English it's you for tu et vous, but in France they don't use the tu.
Yes.
In Dutch you have je and u, so you have also two forms, but in the French culture you don't use the informal form And sometimes
depends on the
involves-
culture,
Yeah,
huh?
yeah.
We tend, for example, in
Yeah.
Belgium to use that probably a little bit more than in France, but it depends. In France, sometimes you use it too. It all depends. In that company, it was more vous than tu.
Yeah,
for sure.
and monsieur.
More vous.
Yeah.
Yeah, more vous than tu, and monsieur le PDG, and blah, blah, formal as well. Huh? All right, direct, indirect. Again, not black and white, the Dutch more direct, the French more indirect. And the question is to make the most of the two. How can you be clear on the content you deliver and sensitive in the way you deliver the content? All right, I see Takia is now joining us. All right. Okay. Oops. Oh, I think, sorry, I messed up as I did this. All right. Sorry about this. I was here. Welcome, Takia. I don't see you, but I'm presenting and I've recorded this for you with the permission of all your colleagues here, so you can see this, the beginning later on, all right? Active reflective is a dimension we added. You probably don't remember that one because it's not part of the standard dimension, but that's one we have added because we found that the French were in the interview said the Dutch, they just like to take action, but they don't spend time, stepping back, reflecting. And the Dutch said the French, they almost have a philosophical debate before any action, and that they felt that to be a bit frustrating. Again, making most of the two. Sometimes it may make sense to reflect. Do we really need to spend all this time reflecting before taking action? Sometimes not, but sometimes it may be helpful to do that. Let's just carefully think about this idea. Let's get to the chase. Going back to your question, Elena. So what we did in these team coaching interventions, shorter than my typical team intervention, I have to say. It was mainly about raising awareness, but then once they've become more aware of the differences, looking at the aggregate results, it's inviting them to discuss how they will apply this to their concrete project. And our role was to keep reminding them of these insights they engaged as they were working on their project. You see, so to apply this immediately to their specific project. So that's how we address this with these different project teams. Then came the time to work with the top team. And with the top team, they expected me to just do the same agenda. But I told them, I think it would make better sense rather than working on culture to address another question you have asked. What is our vision? I think you didn't ask that exactly, but what is the point of doing this? What do we want to accomplish with this alliance? What is your vision? Would you be prepared to work on that? And so I asked each CEO individually, make sure they were okay with that. I asked them, what would be your vision, or what is the vision, in fact? And it seemed that there was sufficient alliance, and based on that, then we had a meeting where, in fact, my role, instead of being a consultant and having and articulating what would be the policies and so on, I got them to articulate that. And the way we did that was to say, well, and maybe it's going to be clearer by showing you this. That's also something you have in the book, Coaching Across Cultures. Let's first look at the vision. I started by crafting the vision based on what the two CEOs had said, and then I asked the rest of the committee, could you please amend that? Any additional ideas? Until they got satisfied with something that would be reflective of the overall management committee. Then the question was, okay, given that, what needs to happen for this vision to become reality? And for example, let's look at competencies. What are the competencies you already have that will allow you to achieve this vision? But what is missing today? And so they came up with a list of, yes, we have these competencies, we might as well leverage these or capitalize on this. But on the other hand, we still have a few gaps, and they identified those gaps. Same thing with the culture. What are the norms, values that already we have and that are aligned with this vision, but what might be in the way here? Same thing with work processes, same thing with motivator. What is already motivating people to work towards this vision, and what may be in the way? I mean, you see sometimes people are asked to collaborate, but they will be compensated based on their individual accomplishments. So sometimes what happens, the logic behind this is that what we want is to have maximum alignment. We want to have to use, to talk about policies, we want to have policies that are in line with the vision, that are in line with the strategy. Because when that is the case, there is no waste of energy. If you have, for example, policies or practices or processes that are not aligned, you are sending a conflicting message, and there is just a waste of energy. To some extent, it's going to be difficult to avoid any conflict. There might still be some conflicting message, but what you want is to have maximum alignment. So all the energy is going into the right direction.
Philippe, can you explain a little more what motivators are and how do they?
Motivator simply is what drives you, what motivates you, what drives you. I don't have a better word of saying that.
What?
And what drives you?
Okay, I understand.
That's all. And so the more you take into account what really drives people, the more engaged they will be. Sometimes you can ask people to do something that they are not really excited about, and that you can oblige them to do that. But if you want to have their full commitment, it's not going to work so well. It's going to work better if people can be really motivated to achieve this vision. So that's what I wanted them to explore. So essentially, I acted as a facilitator, and these leaders crafted this general agenda that was then given to the people in HR who came up with new training programs, new initiatives, but based on what this top team had defined. All right?
Philippe, sorry, it's just a really quick question following Elio's. So does motivator relate to the mission and the purpose of the company?
No, individual, selfish motivation. Motivations of the people.
Okay, so you would then ask them individually for the motivators?
No, I would. In this case, I would ask the top management to figure out what they think. I mean, of course, we could be more sophisticated about this and do a real survey. But from what they know about their organization, what do they see already as source of motivations that people have that is going in the direction of their vision? I mean, think of let me give an example. If in your company you see that people are genuinely excited about the vision you have, and you notice that, well, you can capitalize on that. But if you may also see obstacles, people may be concerned about certain things. I invited these leaders to reflect on that.
Okay.
That's what that was the exercise.
Okay.
And I think one of the things they could decide later on, we want to be maybe more, we need to do a survey to have more information, but just having that reflection can go a long way already, and did go a long way. And so the point was the journey continues afterwards. I told them, after a year they had been very successful, but I told them, the success is not forever. You need to constantly work at that, because polarization can happen very quickly. If you are successful today, you want to make sure that these two companies continue to be united and to work together. I've read a recent report saying that this had been indeed a success, and they were able to continue to be successful. So, but there was no guarantee that was going to happen. I have to also say something which I find really amazing. We almost didn't get that contract. the reason was we were not expensive enough, because these top executives are used to paying the McKinseys and so on, who would stay for a long time, for months there doing, and so that this amounts to a lot of money. Whereas our intervention, we didn't spend that many days, and yet the impact was really very important. So I think there is a big need for this still. It doesn't translate, unfortunately, in a demand yet, because this is still in the hands of, for the most part, of big consulting firms which don't have that expertise, to be honest, and they do something, but they don't have that expertise. But they are the ones who get typically these sorts of contracts. So I think there is an opportunity for us, but you need to have the right introduction to, as intercultural coach, to make a difference here.
So maybe making alliance, Philippe, with those people. Yeah.
But of course, but they don't necessarily
need
care
us.
about this. I mean, in my experience, they are doing their own business. It works. Why would they care? I mean, but yes, there is, I think, that possibility. And
Philippe, may I ask how many people in your team were part of this project?
we were just 3 people.
Wow.
And it's not my team in the sense of these are people who had participated in the program. Just happened that they both spoke French and Dutch. That I think that made it easier for that particular project. But I mean, part of this is also we constitute a group of intercultural coaches, and we can collaborate on different projects in the future. I've seen some of your some of your colleagues who have collaborated with one another on some projects as well, that didn't even involve me.
Philippe, and sorry, lots of questions. You go, Elio.
No, go, please. Sami.
Sure. Okay. This is a really quick one. Do you find, Philippe, in your experience, that these organizations don't often notice what the challenges are when you go in? Because I guess, in typical scenarios, sometimes, people don't really notice that they have, for example, like people engagement problems. It's not until things have happened that they then realize. So, I'm just curious about, the point of entry. When do you then find out? Yeah.
They were starting to feel some pain. There were already some issues there where the collaboration was becoming difficult in some instances. And they were, I guess, savvy enough to take action without delay. But they were very cautious at the beginning. Some were even afraid because some had bad experiences as well with interculturalism that had paradoxically reinforced stereotypes. So that can be a danger as well when you reinforce stereotypes through interculturalism, because in traditional interculturalism, the emphasis is on national differences. I think they became more comfortable when they saw this approach, and they showed that this was more nuanced. It's not black and white. It's not only about national differences. It could have been about other forms of differences. It just happens here that national differences had an impact, but it could have been that national differences maybe were not all that important, that there were other forms of differences that mattered.
Cool.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
So I think that they liked, but they felt some pain, and they recognized we need.
What I wanted to ask to Philippe is many, many years ago, maybe 15, maybe 20, I don't remember, KLM and Alitalia had a long deal to find, to work together, to make an alliance. But at the end, it didn't work. And they say, it is said that it didn't work for this reason,
I met.
And no, my question is, do you know if someone has written about this case between KLM and Alitalia?
I don't know, but I suspect there may be something written about this. But I met somebody involved in that project who attended one of my presentations, who said, "I wish I had known this. I wish we had known this earlier. We could have used this process. That would have been so much more effective. She said that literally. So
Mm.
she was one of the person involved in this venture who said that. It's really unfortunate, huh? But I have to say, of course, the two CEOs here deserve a lot of credit, because those two CEOs were humble enough, savvy enough to engage in the process. Sometimes you have different profiles now of people who think they acquire another company, they don't have that same humility, and of course they are not necessarily interested in what we would offer here, or they want to impose their culture, of course.
I've been in one of those where people started falling out like, flies out of the company because of the shocking cultures. And it's very sad from an HR standpoint. It's very sad to see that happening.
Yes, exactly. All right. Any more questions? If you don't have more questions, I have some questions for you now. And the question will be the oil and Wasser case. What I propose is this. I propose to, I'm just looking at the time, 3:30. Would it be okay to, because you have, well, would it be okay if I just give you 20 minutes to take a quick break and to start reflecting on the questions? If you have the Google Drive, I invite you to look at that document, and I can share it here if you want, about individual questions concerning the case. There are a couple of pages there. I invite you to only look at the questions on the first page, where you need to rate the effectiveness of the different leaders there. But then there are more questions on the second page. You won't have time to even look at that. Please reflect a little bit on your own. Take a break, reflect a bit on your own, and in 20 minutes, when we come back, I will divide you into two groups to have a discussion about your thinking and how you would address this situation.
Can you show this page?
Okay, I would show the page. Let me, if you bear with me here a second, I'm gonna access my Google Drive, and I will show you exactly where that is. So, okay. So let me share my page here, so you can see what I'm doing. Can you see this?
Yes.
So I'm on the Google Drive here, and I'm looking at oil and Wasser. Okay, individual and group exercise. That's the file I'm talking about, individual and group exercise. I click on this, and that's what I'm referring to here. So individual analysis. What are some of the issues that I don't know if you can see this, but you might want to open your own. It will be easier. Issues at play using the COF. What is the profile of the two companies? You don't need to establish the whole profile, but what stands out for you as differences between the two companies, and how would you rate the effectiveness of these leaders? So that's what I invite you to reflect on. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
20 minutes. So can I stop sharing? You know how to access this?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So 20 minutes. I'll see you. Take a short break, look at this, and we'll work together in 20 minutes.